Welcome to the Climate Layer, where we make sustainability simple and misinformation extinct. I'm Alex Banat, and before we dive into today's topic, I want to share a bit about why I started this podcast. When I graduated college, I moved to Hollywood with a dream of making a difference through film, documentaries, environmental storytelling, the works. But reality hit hard, the bills didn't wait for the credits to roll, and I found myself craving something more grounded. So I came back east and got to work. First with utilities, building EV education programs and charging infrastructure across New England. Then I pivoted into PR, where I became a subject matter expert in clean transportation, climate communication, and renewable energy. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was spending more time talking about climate solutions instead of building them. That's why I'm now finishing up my master's in sustainability at Harvard and why I started the Climate Layer. My goal is simple. It's to cut through the noise, bust the myths, and make sustainability something we can all understand without the politics and without the spin. But more than that, I want to untangle the fear, the guilt, the overwhelm, because behind every piece of climate misinformation is an emotion, a worry that it's too late, too hard, or too expensive to change. This show is here to challenge those stories, not just with facts, but with clarity, compassion, and a little bit of hope. So let's get into it. And to start things off, I wanted to take us back to, there's this scene in the show Landman that actually stopped me cold. Billy Bob Thornton's character stands in front of a wind turbine and tells a young lawyer that clean energy, it's a lie. That wind turbines will never offset the emissions it takes to build them, that oil is running out, and that renewables are just a privileged fantasy. It's a beautiful scene. Cinematically, a cowboy in an oil field speaking with grit and conviction, but it's also a masterclass in misinformation. Let's be clear, that monologue is wrong, factually, emotionally, and strategically. First, the wind turbine myth. Yes, building a turbine takes energy, steel, concrete, transportation, but the data is clear. A typical wind turbine offsets its carbon footprint within 6 to 12 months of operation. After that, it generates clean power for 20 to 25 years. Its life cycle emissions are among the lowest of any energy source. Second, the oil narrative. The idea that we're running out of oil, it's an old, something called peak oil story. It's outdated. Hydraulic fracturing and unconventional drilling unlocked vast reserves. We're not running out. We're actually swimming in it. The real issue isn't scarcity, it's abundance. We have more fossil fuels than we can safely burn. And while economic pressures like rising extraction costs and investor fatigue are reshaping production, the reserves themselves are not the problem. The climate impact is. And third, the emotional manipulation. That scene isn't just wrong, it's designed to feel right. It taps into fear, pride, and identity. It tells viewers that clean energy is for the elites, that oil is honest work, and that change is betrayal. But here's the truth. Climate change is real, human-caused, and urgent. And clean energy isn't a scam, it's a solution. It's scalable, cost competitive, and increasingly profitable. You can make money on it. You can build with it. You can be part of it. This podcast exists to challenge those myths, not just with facts, but with empathy. Because misinformation doesn't just confuse people, it paralyzes them. It makes them feel hopeless, defensive, and alone. So, we're here to change that. It's a common misconception, and it's easy to see why when you look at the concept, quote-unquote, EVs aren't actually green. If your EV is plugged into a grid powered by coal or natural gas, one question comes up. How much better can it really be? But here's the reality. EVs produce significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions over their lifetime than gasoline-powered cars, also known as internal combustion engines, or ICE vehicles, even when charged from fossil fuel-heavy grids. That's because electric motors are far more efficient. Per the EPA and the Department of Energy, or the DOE, a typical gas engine converts only about 20 to 30% of its fuel into motion. The rest of that energy is lost as heat. EVs, by contrast, convert over 85% of battery energy into movement. And that efficiency adds up. According to life cycle analysis from MIT and the EPA, most EVs now offset the emissions from battery manufacturing typically within 6 to 24 months, depending on location and driving habits, and continue to produce significantly lower emissions than gasoline vehicles over their lifespan. Back in 2019, that offset period was typically 2 to 3 years, depending on where and how the battery was made. But improvements in manufacturing, cleaner electricity, and better battery design have shortened that timeline considerably. Plus, EVs eliminate tailpipe emissions entirely. That means less nitrogen dioxide, less particulate matter, and fewer asthma cases in urban areas. Cleaner air from reduced tailpipe emissions means fewer ER visits, fewer missed school days, and healthier lungs for everyone. It's not just about carbon, it's about public health for our everyday lives. Despite political setbacks, clean energy isn't slowing down. So solar, wind, and battery storage are scaling fast, and new players like geothermal and hydrogen are stepping in. What most people miss is this: the grid is getting cleaner every year. In 2020, renewables overtook coal in the US for the first time. That means every mile you drive an EV becomes progressively lower in emissions. As of 2025, renewables generate more electricity than coal nationwide, and the gap is growing. That future isn't waiting, it's already happening. Compare that to a gas car, its emissions are locked in. Every gallon burned releases carbon, no matter how efficient that engine is. So, no, EVs aren't perfect, but they are measurably cleaner in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and their entire life cycle emissions. And they're improving as the grid decarbonizes. ICE cars are not. The myth that EVs are just as bad as gas cars, it's not just inaccurate, it's a barrier to progress. It slows adoption, undermines policy, and keeps us tied to a system that already is overheating. So let's talk about something we all use but almost never think about: the grid. It's in the headlines: data centers, blackouts, rate hikes, climate goals. But what does it actually mean? This segment is called the grid layer, and each time we visit it, we'll peel back one more piece of the puzzle. Not all at once, just enough to make sense of the system that powers our lives and shapes our future. Because if we want to change how energy works, we need to understand how it works first. So let's start with the basics. When people say the grid, they're talking about the massive interconnected system that delivers electricity from where it's made to where it's used. But it's not one single thing, it's a network, and it has three main parts: generation, transmission, and distribution. Generation is where electricity is produced. That could be a coal plant, a natural gas turbine, a wind farm, a solar array, a hydro dam, or a nuclear reactor. Transmission is the high voltage highway system that moves the electricity across long distances. Think of those big metal towers and thick cables you see cutting across the landscape. And distribution is the local wiring that brings power to your home, your school, your grocery store. But here's where it gets messy. The grid isn't owned by one company or managed by one agency. It's a patchwork of investor-owned utilities, municipal light plants, electric co-ops, and regional grid operators. Some are for-profit, some are non-profit. Some are regulated by state commissions. Others operate more like private businesses. And all of that affects how decisions get made about what kind of power gets built, how much it costs, and who gets to benefit. You've probably heard terms like ratepayer, capacity market, or grid congestion, and thought, I have no idea what that means. And honestly, that's not your fault. The system wasn't built to be transparent. That doesn't mean that it's off limits. You deserve to understand it because it affects your bills, your choices, and your future. So here's a quick primer to get us started. If you pay an electric bill, you are a ratepayer. That's the term utilities use for customers. The load is the total amount of electricity being used at any given time. Peak demand is when that load hits its highest point, usually during extreme weather like a heat wave or a cold snap. Capacity is how much electricity the grid can deliver when it's pushed to its limit. And the grid mix is the blend of energy sources that make up your electricity. So coal, gas, nuclear, wind, solar, hydro. That mix determines how clean or dirty your power really is. Understanding these terms helps you see through the noise, because when someone says the grid can't handle EVs or renewables are unreliable, they're often skipping over the real story, how their grid is built, who controls it, and what's already changing. This is just the beginning. In future episodes, we'll dig into how utilities make money, how transmission bottlenecks slow down clean energy, and how rate structures affect equity. But for now, just remember, the grid isn't magic, it's infrastructure, and it's changing. So let's keep peeling. Before we wrap, I want to give you a quick tool for your climate conversations: how to spot misinformation. Climate myths don't just come from trolls. They show up in headlines, social media posts, even casual conversations. So here are 4 red flags to watch out for. Number 1, oversimplified claims. If someone says solar panels cause more pollution than coal, that's a red flag. It's not just wrong, it's misleading by omission. Yes, solar panels require energy to manufacture, and that process emits carbon. But over their lifetime, they generate clean electricity that offsets those emissions many times over. According to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, still standing, though barely, solar's life cycle carbon footprint is roughly 20 times lower than coal per kilowatt hour. Real climate science accounts for full life cycle emissions, not just the upfront cost. Number 2, cherry-picked data. Watch out for stats that ignore context. For example, someone might cite the emissions from EV battery production and claim EVs are worse than gas cars. But that ignores the full picture. EVs have no tailpipe emissions, and their overall efficiency is much higher. Again, as we said before, studies from MIT and the EPA show that most EVs offset their battery-related emissions within the first year of driving, and continue to outperform gas vehicles over time. Cherry-picked data often focuses on one moment in the life cycle while ignoring the long-term impact. Number 3, questionable sources. If the info comes from a group funded by fossil fuel interests, heavily motivated by political backers, or it's just lacking transparency, dig deeper. In fact, always dig deeper. Even with whatever I share with you here, the best defense against misinformation? Curiosity. Ask where the data comes from. Ask what's missing. Ask who benefits. Because misinformation isn't just about being wrong, it's about shaping the narrative. And the more you understand who's behind the message, the better you can decide whether to trust it. Number 4, false balance. Be wary of arguments that give equal weight to fringe views just to seem neutral. Not every opinion deserves the same platform. Climate science has overwhelming consensus. Over 97% of actively publishing climate scientists agree that human activity is driving global warming. Giving equal airtime to denialism, it's not balance, it's distortion. False balance confuses the public, slows policy, and creates the illusion of debate where none really exists. Real balance means weighing evidence, not just opinions. So that's it for today's episode of The Climate Layer. If you found this helpful, share it with someone who's still on the fence about EVs, or unsure about renewables, or just ready to dive deeper. Subscribe, leave a review, and help us cut through the noise. Got a myth you want busted, a term you want decoded? Send it my way. This show is built for curious minds like yours. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep working towards a cleaner world.